जय गणेश जय गणेश जय गणेश देवा।
जय गणेश जय गणेश जय गणेश देवा।
जय गणेश जय गणेश जय गणेश देवा।
जय गणेश जय गणेश देवा।
श्री गणेश श्री गणेश श्री 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 गणेश देवा।
जय गणेश जय गणेश जय गणेश देवा।
जय गणेश जय गणेश देवा।
भक्तोद्धारणा भक्तजन पोषणा।
भक्तोद्धारणा भक्तजन पोषणा।
भक्तोद्धारणा भक्तजन पोषणा।
भक्तोद्धारणा भक्तजन पोषणा।
पाप विनाशना भक्त संरक्षणा।
पाप विनाशना भक्त संरक्षणा।
पाप विनाशना भक्त संरक्षणा।
पाप विनाशना भक्त संरक्षणा।
ओंकारा प्रणव श्री रूपा।
ओंकारा प्रणव श्री रूपा।
ओंकारा प्रणव श्री रूपा।
ओंकारा प्रणव श्री रूपा।
पार्वती नंदना जय जगवंदना।
पार्वती नंदना जय जगवंदना।
पार्वती नंदना जय जगवंदना।
पार्वती नंदना जय जगवंदना।
जय गणेश जय गणेश जय गणेश देवा।
जय गणेश जय गणेश जय गणेश देवा।
श्री गणेश श्री गणेश श्री गणेश देवा।
श्री गणेश श्री गणेश श्री गणेश देवा।
जय गणेश जय गणेश जय गणेश देवा।
जय गणेश जय गणेश जय गणेश देवा।
भक्तोद्धारणा भक्तजन पोषणा।
भक्तोद्धारणा भक्तजन पोषणा।
पाप विनाशना भक्त संरक्षणा।
पाप विनाशना भक्त संरक्षणा।
ओंकारा प्रणव श्री रूपा।
ओंकारा प्रणव श्री रूपा।
पार्वती नंदना जय जगवंदना।
पार्वती नंदना जय जगवंदना।
पार्वती नंदना जय जगवंदना।
पार्वती नंदना जय जगवंदना।
जय गणेश जय गणेश जय गणेश देवा।
Saram everyone, and happy Ganesh Chaturthi to those celebrating. Let us first go over some Zoom keeping rules. Please mute yourself during the session, except of course when you're speaking. We request you to keep your video on. This is to encourage active listening and stimulate a classroom feeling. Please use the virtual room chat option for your responses, questions, or concerns. This will be constantly monitored. You may use the hands raised option under participant to ask a question during the Q&A. We will be using breakout rooms today, so if you're mistakenly removed from a breakout room or you accidentally leave, you'll be able to rejoin the same breakout room again. Lastly, we encourage you to utilize the thumbs up or clap reactions in response to the speaker when befitting. We're almost done with our ELWS series with only 3 more sessions to go. Last week, Dr. Ranga Jayaraman led the conflict resolution session, which was undoubtedly very eye-opening. We not only learned about the different types of conflict resolution styles, but also when they are the most effective. So far, we have noticed that the most invigorating parts of our session has been the Q&A portion. So please be sure to remain for that today. I also want to request all of you to keep the pre-session PDF open and available for you. You can find this in the reminder email we sent out to all of you yesterday. Now, I would like to welcome Mr. Sunil Kasturi, who will be leading our strategy development session today. Sunil Kasturi has been in Swami's fold for the last 30 years, the last 20 of which have been within centers in Region 5, Iowa, Region 6, Oregon and Washington, and Region 7, Northern California. He currently serves as a young adult advisor for Region 7. Sunil completed his undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering at the Birla Institute of Technology and Science, a master's in computer science from the University of Iowa, and an MBA from Duke University. Mr. Kasturi started off his career in product and program management roles in the computer hardware and software industry, and then moved on to management consulting over the last decade. Currently, as the managing director of Propeller's San Francisco office, he oversees all firm and client-facing functions and is accountable for the firm's performance and results. Besides being an integral part of embodying and fostering firm culture, this includes P&L management, business development, recruiting, client satisfaction, and account management. His interests include music, cooking, travel, and running. With that, please help me welcome Mr. Sunil Kasturi as I ask him to guide us through strategy development. Sairam, Mr. Kasturi.
Sairam, everybody. So nice to see you all on this Saturday afternoon. I recognize a lot of you, obviously, as coming from the same region. So it's really nice to meet you in this different context than where we find ourselves usually. I'm going to share my desktop and also project. Can I have my visual up? Can somebody quickly give me a thumbs up when they see strategy development take the whole screen? Good, thank you. Thanks, everybody. And meanwhile, thank you for using the thumbs up function as well. I'm gonna keep my eye on the chat through this conversation. So if anything noteworthy comes up that you wanna bring up, either questions or comments to the material we're following, or just ideas, make sure that you keep posting it in the chat. We may not get to everything in this conversation today, but it'll be good to pivot as necessary. If there's a second or two of additional time available, certainly would want to kind of take advantage of those extra precious minutes to walk through things that may be interesting for you. So just want to make sure I call that out. And with that, we will start off with a quote. And the first thing I wanted to focus on was this person called Sun Tzu. He wrote a book called The Art of War. And you know, this is, we're starting this in the context of Swami's fold. So war is not necessarily the place that our minds go to immediately. But Sun Tzu is used pretty constantly in management circles, at least, for his sense of strategy. The way in which he protected his troops and also brought very successful outcomes to the work he was doing. By that, I mean, he was able to contain loss of property, life, etc., by able to think about strategy before he actually went headlong into action. And the art of war is used in at least in business school pretty constantly. So while our hearts are focused on nonviolence, that Swami always espouses, let's just take this quote for what it's worth. Sun Tzu said, "Strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. So in this conversation today, what we're mainly focused on trying to do is to think about how do we think about certain things and frame them in a certain way such that we have a plan of action, a strategy, an approach before we go headlong into making things happen. This can mean anything in your day-to-day life. This can mean things in your work life, as you work with other departments, work within your organizations, work with other people. It can mean things within the SI organization and the service projects that you undertake or the long things that you plan for. I know that, for example, we're already beginning planning for Christmas with the SSIO. So, you know, all of these things are multiple months worth of planning. So these kinds of tactics and techniques are very helpful before we go and get into a long range planning exercise like that. And certainly it can just apply to your day-to-day as well. Just small things that you're thinking about tweaking in your day-to-day. You know, when Swami announced that he was going to have the super specialty hospital built within the year, he got it accomplished, and we all know why. That's the power of divinity with the most positive intentions. And Swami certainly says that all of us have that same power innate with us. But until we realize that and we're able to make things happen just with the snap of our fingers, this is a good way to kind of think about what are the building blocks that go through. How does A lead to B, lead to C, lead to D, to get us to the ends we need to accomplish. So with that, I want to create a little bit of an overview of the session today. The session today will cover three things. One is just importance of strategy. So we'll talk a little bit about why is this even an interesting or an important area for all of us to be tracking. The second thing we'll talk about is strategic plan development. So this conversation is all about how do we develop strategic plans. If we define strategy and we think it's important, how do we incorporate aspects of it, or how do we break it down so that we have a better understanding of all of the different moving pieces? And I'm going to introduce a quick framework that will help us do this. And this framework is called the 4-point framework, where we talk about how do we assess where we are, the current state, what are the nuggets or the pieces we have to build, the components to get there. And then once we build it, how do we kind of bring it all together in a plan? And then how do we know that when we actually go from that thought process, strategy portion to the actual tactics and execution portion, we know what we need to measure in order to know that we're successful. I'll also end with a couple of additional considerations that I think are quite important to the times we live in. And so this is a time, this is really a focus on how do we start thinking about some of the important aspects of strategy, especially in the context of, in today's work, in today's life. So with that, I'm going to jump into an example on the importance of strategy. So I'm going to share, I'm going to go to YouTube and share this, and I'll share this a couple of times just so you have a couple of opportunities to see it. So I'm going to click play, go into full screen mode, and I'll click play again for those who are seeing this. This is a quick 1-minute development. Watch it closely because I'm going to ask 1 or 2 questions that I would encourage you to use the chat session to actually respond to me while I play this the second time. What this is the top 15 global brands on the left. And you're seeing the global brands kind of gain in importance from a growth perspective on the right. So you're seeing the constant shift of things that are happening. And you're seeing certain brands that are jumping up and down. Given these are all commercial brands, so this is not, this is more of an exercise that's happening with private companies that are consumer products or consumer-facing brands in any event. So that's how we have data until about 2018 for this, and that's how 2018 ends. So I'm going to go back and replay this. But I'm going to ask a question that you can respond. What are some of the things you found interesting as you walked through this exercise? As you saw the brands shifting, what are just one thing, don't even do 1 or 2, one thing that caught your eye that was interesting. And we'll come back to this slide. We'll come back to the slides and talk about it in a second. Okay, clicking play again. Maybe this time, look out for some of the brands that are so common today, Google or Apple, for example, and notice that when the date is 2001, there is something significant in this particular depiction. They're not on the map, so to speak. And now let's play it. Whoops. There we go. Use the chat and any quick things that are coming top of mind, just make sure you're putting them into the chat and sharing it with everybody. Numbers are moving slowly, mostly stable. That is certainly until about, I think, the first half of that graph. I think that is certainly true. I think now you're seeing some jolts. Things are moving a little quicker, yes. L mentioned Apple. Apple suddenly came into the picture and suddenly they are where they are. Yes, Google and Apple weren't even in the picture. Apple suddenly came and is now a beloved brand in 2017, sorry. Yes, and then some of the names present now weren't present earlier and vice versa. I think this is a really, I'm going to stop here. And so the idea is that we are in a generation, point in time, where a number of
Awesome. So we see already, the minute I press the button live, I saw people already. So that's.
There we go. We didn't need that. Yes. So now we see that, there are names that are coming in that did not even exist during that first half of the time period we were following. And so we're seeing a very dynamic environment. And I think that the thing that I want to call out here is change is constant these days. The world is accelerating around us in a number of different ways. And when we live in a world of constant and accelerating change, one of the things that really help companies that are moving up and down in this distribution, in this simulation that we just saw, is the fact that they have paid close attention to their strategy. And they have paid close attention to the fact that times will change and times will change in a way that things that work today don't necessarily work the exact same way in the future to the same extent. So how do we start thinking about planning for that future and gaining and making sure we're continuing to do a really good job in delighting our employees, our customers, our constituents, our stakeholders, the people we serve. Some interesting things that are pointing to this change. There is a generational aspect of it. So one of the things is that millennial and Gen Z employees, which I think is a lot of the people in the attending the meeting today. I think I myself am a Gen X, I believe is the term for me. But they are expected, millennial and Gen Z are expected to surpass baby boomers, which are people born between 1961 onwards by the end of 2019. And they'll be half of the working population by 2020 right now. Digitization of everything, 60% growth in technology skills. And know that this actually is a pre-COVID estimate. And you can imagine how much COVID is playing kind of a focus on technology and how technology is an enabler, especially in the environments we work. So there is a real expectation that even though I may be in a non-technology job, that I really have to embrace technology to some extent in order to be successful in my work. So that's kind of becoming, the digital aspects of things are being incorporated in a lot of things we're thinking about and working on. And then innovation and agility, which I think a lot of you in the chat at least called out, which is 2/3 of the business leaders are thinking that we have to pick up the pace because we have to kind of keep pace with this level of growth and dynamic nature of the industries we're in or the organizations we serve. So with that, I think we get to a place of, can we look at a story where this actually wasn't perhaps paid as much attention to and what happened there? And then at the same time, look at the flip side and try to understand why strategy is really super important. So with that, let's get to talk about Blockbuster. So how many of you, raise a quick show of hands, how many of you on this call actually have been to a Blockbuster store? All right, a few of us have. Others are like, what is this Blockbuster thing you're talking about? So that must be the millennials in the group, I'm sure, or even the Gen Z. So Blockbuster used to be a thriving place where at the end of the week on a Friday night, you would go and stand in line to check out first videotapes, later Laserdiscs, and finally DVDs, and then even Blu-ray discs at a point, right? It used to be a store exactly as shown in the picture, founded in 1985. It employed almost 85,000 people and had 9,000 stores all across the United States as well as Central and South America. And then in 2010, in the short period of time between its peak, 2004, and then it filed for bankruptcy. The one thing that is interesting in this study is that Netflix in 2000 approached Blockbuster to say, hey, we will sell for $50 million. So there was a deal that was in the works for a $50 million deal between Netflix and Blockbuster. Blockbuster did not, as we know, buy Netflix at that point because it was a very small niche business. And now in 2020, Netflix has 182 million subscribers and a quarterly revenue of 5.7 billion. And if I did, the last year's annual revenue was about 4 times that. So I think there are two interesting things here around strategy. One is Blockbuster did not see the changing of the times. It did not see that graph that you just observed and the dynamicity of what was going on there. And so it said, we are always going to be brick and mortar, physical stores, and that's how the world's going to be. We don't need to adapt. And then the other side of this is also Netflix, because Netflix's business is obviously valued way more than 50 million that it offered to sell to Blockbuster back in the time. So there's this notion around how difficult it is to really predict the future and how sound one's kind of assessment of what is coming to bear in the future and how we prepare from it from a strategic sense is really important in creating the right plans and the right paths for the future. So with that, I think we can think about 3 important things of why we would need strategy to be in place before we go into how do we actually develop it. The first thing is that more and more a company's identity is central and core. So by that, what do I mean? So when we looked at the brands in that up and down kind of simulation that we saw, there is a way in which the business environment, as well as just consumers and people that kind of consume services from companies, look to brands and look to companies and how this brand expresses itself internally, which is called the culture of the company and how their people interact with their customers, so on and so forth, and how this brand is viewed externally, which is sometimes called the brand of the company, and how customers view the company. That is a really important aspect of a company, and that needs strategic planning before tactics can be employed in that space. The second is every company needs to be very clear about why it is in the business it is in. So whether it is a hospital or a nonprofit organization that serves at-risk youth, they need a clear vision of what is the direction we're heading in and why is it important to attract and retain customers. Now, when I say customers here, I use kind of it's a business term I'm using. So in the case of the nonprofit that's looking out for the youth, their customers would be the clients that take advantage of their services, and in this case, the youth. How do they make sure youth are able to come in and take advantage of the services they provide, and how do they make sure that the youth come back and continue to take advantage of these services? And the third is without strategy, without thinking, a company does not have the time and the energy to think about what does it represent to the community it is in from a values and a corporate responsibility perspective, right? So there are some aspects of this that are modeled mathematically, costs, expenses, revenues, profits, EBITDA, etc. But really, companies exist and companies are, and people go back to companies and organizations because holistically they like what the company represents. And for that, a company needs to strategically think about and project what are the values? What do I stand for? When people think of me, insert company name, what does it evoke in them? So these are three things that are not, it's not tactical. It's not decided in the moment, but it takes a lot of kind of upfront planning and thought before you really get to a place where you express this with authenticity and with consistency. And so that's why we want to really pay attention to this when we think about strategy. So with that, we'll get into strategy development, and I'll start with a poll. When you hear the word strategy, what's the first word that comes to your mind? When you hear the word strategy, what's the first word that comes to your mind? You can go to pollev.com/SciYAUSA360. You can click on that, or you can point your smartphone and you can actually make sure that your camera picks this up so that that QR code will open that form. I'm going to switch to that form in a second. And you should be able to get the same instructions here as well.
Was activated. Could you activate again, please?
Sorry, it was blued. Thank you. Vision, that's excellent. That's an important component of strategy that we'll be talking about. Planning, absolutely. Chanakya, great answer. I was reading a lot of articles about how Lord Krishna was a master strategic planner. So I completely relate to that. Long-term plan, long-term. A lot of people went with planning. Process, how it's important to have a process to think about when we think about strategic planning. I see game, corners. Oh, looking around corners, I think is what somebody meant there. That is, I use that phrase all the time, which is why I actually could pick that up I believe that's what that person was referring to. And that's absolutely what strategy, it kind of thinks about all of the different eventualities and how do you kind of think about it 4 steps ahead. I'm curious that nobody mentioned chess because that's another thing. When I think about strategic planning, chess just came up. I don't know if somebody put that in after they heard me say it, but good. I see chess. The other place where strategy, I think, becomes really important and used pretty consistently, and a lot of frameworks come up from, is the military as well. Awesome. War. Somebody said war. Yep. Very good. Any comments around, I'm just trying to pick a word. Who said innovation? Could somebody who talked about innovation and strategy possibly provide a little bit more insight around what they were thinking when they said innovation? Can unmute yourselves.
Oh, what did you say, Sunil, about innovation?
Yeah,
I was the one who typed.
Innovation. I was curious why, why strategy brought innovation to mind? Why did it relate that way to you? Would you mind sharing?
I think in a lot of tech companies and all, your strategy can only go as far as you innovate. Right. Because if you don't innovate, you sort of, it doesn't matter how big of a strategy you have. I think I definitely speak from my own company experience. You do a lot of things, but if you don't innovate, you don't produce. It doesn't matter. You can make all big slides and everything. So.
Great. No, that's a great point. It's all about thinking about what is changing and how do you keep ahead of the change. I saw one more. Somebody said probability. Would that person mind sharing about why probability came to mind when they thought about strategy?
That was me. I said probability because I think you have a pretty good idea of possible outcomes or even possible challenges that may arise and how you want to strategize tackling those. So that was kind of one of the reasons why I said probability.
Awesome. Well, thank you. All great ideas. Thank you for sharing. So, I'll take a simple kind of really dictionary definition of strategy. It's a plan of action. A lot of people said plan or policy designed to achieve a major or overall aim. So the aim could be, as Rishma just mentioned, it could be the probability of success. How do we kind of create, if our overall aim is success and whatever that means to us, how do we create a plan of action to map towards that success? Or as Sai Kiran pointed out, if we know that the world is changing and in order for us to be ahead, we have to think about constantly adapting. How do we create a policy such that we're always thinking about challenging the status quo? And the overall aim is innovation or challenging the status quo and doing things differently and better, right? So I think that's at the base of it all, it's strategy. That is strategy. So one thing I'm going to do is just quickly introduce this business case. We will not talk about it here. You will have a couple of minutes to read about it. This is Share with Love Industries. And the reason I'm introducing the business case right now is we'll talk about the planning framework in a little bit. And we'll use aspects of the framework to actually work with this business case so that there's a little bit of a hands-on kind of interaction there. But Share with Love Industries, think of it as, for lack of a better, parallel, an organization like Goodwill, right? So SLI basically operates a number of thrift stores, and then it generates revenues through these thrift stores, and it allows people who have difficulty finding jobs work at these thrift stores, as well as provides them training and employment opportunities into other places. This SLI, obviously, because it is focused on people that it serves, does not just look for profits. It looks for sustainability. How can it help the environment? It looks for how much are their employees benefiting from this, as well as what value are they bringing to the customers and to the communities that they serve. So these are the three-pronged things that SLI is paying attention to, not just profits. They've been very successful. They're in Scandinavia as well as South America, besides all over the US, Denmark, Sweden, in Scandinavia, Peru, and Brazil in South America. So, and then there are some numbers. It generated so much in revenue. They actually, 75% of that 3.2 billion, they paid directly into programs that supported people. They served 60 million people. They placed 100,000 people into employment. And in 2020, because they operate a line of thrift stores, they are facing some challenges because people aren't coming into stores as much. And so they don't have a super e-commerce setup. So you can't necessarily go online and buy things as easily, and people aren't coming into stores as much. So they're facing some challenges. Have this in the back of your mind. This was sent out as part of the pre-session documents that we sent to you yesterday for a quick read. And I'll summarize this again, but this will just be helpful for you to kind of keep at the back of your mind. With that, let's get into the framework. So for a strategic plan, there are 4 steps that I talked about. One is current state. How do we figure out where we are today so that we can understand the delta from where we need to go to? Swami consistently talks about introspection. Like, you don't know where you're heading unless you take stock of where you are right now and what you need to work on. And this is very similar. It's always important to think about current state. From there, what are the different components? And we'll talk about some components and work on a couple of components today in this session. And then you build a plan. I'll share a plan that's been built, but we won't have as much time to build the plan today because it's a long and pretty intense process to build a strategic plan. And then we'll talk a little bit about measure and manage. And that'll be brief as well, because next week, you know that Jaggu Jagannathan Uncle is actually going to walk you through measuring and managing performance. And so there is a whole session about strategy deployment next week. So this week we'll talk about how, when we create a strategy, do we think about the right things that we need to measure and how, so that when you deploy it, you know that you have an opportunity to measure it and therefore make improvements or know how well you're doing, right? So with that, let's jump directly into determining current state. So we'll walk through all of these 4: determining current state, components of strategy, building the plan, measuring and managing performance. Current state. I'm going to share 3 quick things around current state, and then you will spend some time in a breakout session working on one of them. So there is a very famous framework out there called Porter's framework. And what this does is thinks about the world in the context of the 5 different elements that are in this page, and helps and makes that a really good assessment on how to define where you are currently. Porter has published extensively in the Harvard Business Review, and this is actually something that came more than 30 years ago in the Harvard Business Review. Anything that we think about in a current state perspective, we think about in 5 ways. The central thing is industry rivalry. It's called that in a term, but really we should think about, if we are not providing this, who else is providing it, and who else are our stakeholders going to? Why are they coming to us? Why are they going to those folks? How many of those folks are there? How well do they provide the service? What are their costs? Who are their customers? The one above and one below is kind of input and output. So if you're in an industry that's providing services, your input, for example, you need a lot of, you may need infrastructure around offices, you may need raw materials, you may certainly have a big need of people. And so thinking about all of those numbers, what's the size of supplier power that you have? How unique are they? How different are the different suppliers out there? And then cost and ability to substitute. What that means is, if you are completely dependent, say you're building a house and there's only one wood supplier in your neighborhood who's authorized to supply, and they're extremely expensive, but regulations prevent you from substituting that person who's providing you wood. They can basically create a structure where they can charge what they want, because the ability to substitute is very, very poor. And so the cost becomes a good factor for them. And similarly, when you think about buyers in the bottom of this, how many people out there are depending on you for your services? What is the size? How do they differentiate each other? And then how can they go to somebody else instead of coming to you for a particular service? We find this, for example, when we were volunteering, when I was in Region 6 and volunteering with the Oregon Food Bank, right? If I think about the food banks, people who receive food from the food bank as our customers, as our clients, as people who we are providing the service to, around the time of Thanksgiving, we would not be able to provide a service to them because the number of people providing that service to them are, very, very high. Everyone wants to provide a meal during Thanksgiving, or provide, a lot of canned goods at that time. And therefore, the other times of the year is when the need is higher. When you think about the left versus right, it's threat of new entrants versus threat of substitutes. New entrants is all about technology, intellectual property, which is knowledge, and then how much time and cost does it take to develop something? We find this constantly. New entrants, for example, in the pharmacy industry, the threat is actually pretty controlled, because we know that it takes a long time to develop medicines, and takes a lot of time and knowledge, and also companies are consistently building IP, pharmacy companies, and how they develop a drug, etc. And then threat of substitutes. So, for example, there are some people that swear by, let's say, Coca-Cola or Pepsi. And for some people, such as I, who don't drink much of cola, it honestly doesn't matter, right? And so for me, it doesn't matter. The threat of substitute is very, very high, because my loyalty to either Coca-Cola or Pepsi is pretty low. But when I think about, say, coffee, I do like Phil's coffee. I like the taste. And there, the threat of substitute is extremely low, because even if there are other coffee shops in my way to a Phil's, I won't stop there. I'll go to the Phil's. So each of us kind of think about, what are the options available to all of the groups that we're providing our services to? The next thing here is, then you gather insight. And I'll just say one thing. Insight needs to be fully rounded. I'm a big fan of 360-degree insights, because I think it's really important to not only understand what are your customers saying, and you can get that via satisfaction surveys, Glassdoor reviews these days, for companies. You can do focus group testing and get insights into what your customers are saying. And then there are best-in-class customer service and customer engagement strategies. How are we doing against that? But the other group, which we may not kind of collect, and we need to, is how are people feeling about doing this work? Especially when the economy and the job market get tight. I think it's really important to think about, how well are you serving your employees? How well are they feeling supported and connected to your organization? And it's very hard to get that group of people to just fill a survey once or twice a year. So thinking about pulses, like at one point when you roll out a big policy, gain some impact. Like if you say, hey, we are cutting short, you don't have unlimited PTO anymore. Your PTO is now restricted to 3 weeks a year. Gain some quick insight into what employees feel, because that actually will inform your strategy and your thought process better as well. Finally, the SWOT. This is where we're going to be spending a little bit of time. So pay a little attention to this, because you're going to be thinking about these 4 areas: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for the business case company, SLI, Share with Love Industries, that we set up a few minutes ago. Strengths are things that are unique advantages that you have over, that your organization has over others. If you think about food banks, I think their ability to provide non-perishable and perishable foods, they don't actually serve foods. Their strength is they've really figured out that, you know, there are places that there are shelters that sometimes provide foods. Food is donated through a number of ways, but there is no central way to provide cans and kind of dry grains and cereals and things of that nature, which are very essential and critical for healthy nourishment for families. So food banks, the strength is their ability to say, we are focusing on that. The weakness comes from the introspection part, which is, what are the things that I am actually at a disadvantage relative to others? So I will say that having belonged to a startup for the last several years, that is constantly growing, right? When you are a 120, 25 person consulting team, growth is a constant. The scale at which you may offer things that bigger consulting firms offer, you know, are different, because you're smaller and you're a little bit more scrappier, as most startups are. So being very attuned to, okay, how do we still do the best we can, given the kind of class of companies we're in, class of organizations we're in. Opportunities are external. So the first 2 are internal. It's introspective. You're looking within the organizations. The next 2 are external, which are a function of the environment. First is opportunities. What's out there that we could exploit to our advantage? So one example is when COVID-19 struck and restaurants were not allowed to bring in people, some of them kind of changed their facilities to do COVID testing, because that was an opportunity that they could actually spend, you know, it was really serving the community. It was a need at that moment. They had the real estate space in key areas, and so they kind of went into that opportunity. And threats is similarly the opposite of opportunities in the external facing side, which is elements in the environment that could cause challenges for the business. So I will go back to, right, you know, in March or April, companies that did not have a very sound way of thinking about, if we can't actually come together, how does our business progress? If you think about large, like, you know, rock concerts or large stadium sport venues, the threat in the environment is that there's something happened that couldn't bring a large number of people within an area. So how did they adjust to the threat? And did they actually think about it and have something in their strategy that planned for that? So with that, you'll be in a breakout room. So I would advise you to bring up the document that Rishma talked about in the very beginning. Keep that in the back of your mind. And what you're going to be doing is, each of these breakout rooms, there's going to be 6. And I do say, check your room names as you transition. As you're brought into your breakout rooms, it'll actually tell you if you're a strengths breakout room or a weakness breakout room or an opportunities breakout room or a threats breakout room. And the idea is you are thinking about either a strength that SLI has, a weakness that SLI has, an opportunity, which is, remember, opportunities and threats are external, that SLI can take advantage of, and a threat from the external environment that can be a threat for SLI to serve serve the people that it serves. So with that, we will let you go into breakout rooms. Awesome. I think, you know, it's going to be pretty time bound, this conversation. So I'm just going to say, how about one person from breakout room 1 talk about one main strength that showed up.
Okay, so from breakout room one, one of the biggest strengths that we discussed was the fact that they had a presence in a lot of different countries. So that's something they can use to their advantage in terms of opening up or not opening up, along with the fact that they are a nonprofit, which helps them market themselves better because people might be more willing to help out if it is for a good cause. So that's something we discussed.
Yeah, I think that mission kind of focus came up in a lot of the conversations I was listening in. Strength room two, one strength. That wasn't the one that was just shared. Thank you for sharing.
Sure. So I'll take, we had something similar about the international focus, but a little bit of different approach in that there's more supply or more demand for certain products in different markets. They can better cross-match that so that, lessens those imbalances. It can lead to more profitably selling their goods.
Perfect. Diversification is kind of built into their strategy just because of the nature of who they are. Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. Weakness from the room three that did weakness. What is one of their biggest weaknesses right now?
Go ahead, Sunil.
Yeah, one of the weaknesses we discussed was the e-commerce thing, like which you said in the talk. Like they don't have enough revenue right now because people don't come for shopping. And so that is, I think, one of the biggest weaknesses right now they have, that they don't have proper finances to invest in future innovation strategies.
No, very true. That's a challenge because they've been impacted by that when they didn't think maybe that the impact would be that significant. Great point. So, e-commerce. Weakness room two.
So we spoke about how the different thrift stores are individually managed. So the leadership teams are different across each of the thrift stores. So they don't have common ground on how the whole the organization as a whole would be run. So they could have different guidelines, different processes in place because of different managements that are there.
Great point. And especially in a time where you're facing kind of a unique and quite uniform challenge, such as COVID. What does that mean for you? Great point for that. And even in non-COVID times, right? That lack of standardization can be a little bit of a risk and a weakness. Perfect. The group that discussed opportunities. What was your top opportunity?
Okay, I will go then. I was just waiting for others to go. Okay. So we spoke about the cultural inclusion because it's various countries it's spread out. So there's a possibility of cultural inclusion as well as second-hand interest in clothing because it's a thrift store. Mostly some younger generation are interested in that, not just in clothing, but other supplies as well, like decorations or anything of that. And of course, we spoke about the online setup. That was cool.
So you saw how your weakness became an opportunity in that. Yeah. Yes, exactly. That was a great point. And the cultural piece is also extremely interesting. As far as thinking about, when I kind of popped into your room, you were talking about festivals that may be important to certain groups of people, etc. So great, thank you. And then threats, the group that discussed threats. What was your top threat? What in the external environment threatened SLI the most?
So I would say that probably the biggest threat to SLI is the fact that it could shut down at any point because their whole mission is to really educate and train future employees. And one really good point that was brought up is the fact that a lot of people want to donate right now to causes because of COVID and because of the trouble in the country. And Amazon and these big corporations may be absorbing a lot of those, those donations because smaller nonprofits like this one are probably unheard of. So they need to, the threat is them shutting down, and this may tie into an opportunity, but they need to identify ways to kind of become more of an e-commerce type or offer online solutions so that they can still survive in spite of not having, if a lot of their retail stores that they work with are having to shut down, they'll need to figure out ways to survive because of the threat of shutting down.
Absolutely. I think if you think about it, when people are uncertain, I think they're certainly willing to spend less money, right? That's why you keep monitoring consumer, kind of the consumer index, the consumer confidence index. And if they're spending less money, are they spending even less money in places like thrift stores? And that's a huge threat. If you're not able to get that kind of business of people coming in, even though your mission is great, what does that mean to you? Does that mean your store needs to close down because you just can't match that interest? Again, great points. I think this was a really good activity, and this is a good backdrop to understand, okay, this is pretty interesting, because now you're thinking about what do I kind of rest on from a strengths perspective? What do I need to fix internally? What do I need to prepare for externally? So on and so forth. And I think that's a great segue to think about these kinds of things should be answered by the components within your strategy that stand out as things that you just know are part of your company. So with that, we should start thinking about the strategic components. And today we'll spend time in 3: mission, vision, and values. So a mission is the reason why an organization exists, really, right? So an organization is defined for a certain purpose. It's got a certain goal. It wants to provide a service or provide a product or provide something to a primary group of customers or stakeholders or a market or a group. And then there are geographical regions in which it operates. So organizations are around for a reason. What is that reason? What is the reason that that organization serves, right? So that is the mission of the organization. It's a very current document. It is something that is, if an organization's mission isn't in alignment with where it is, organizations need to work now in order to fix that, right? A vision, however, is aspirational. It's that point in the future where an organization would like to be somewhere in the future. And so this is not just, business organizations, nonprofit organizations, government organizations could also want to be debt neutral or carbon neutral. Those are all vision statements where an organization says, the mission for which I exist, I'm going to serve that mission, and I'm going to chart my way to a vision in a 5-year period or a 7-year period where I reach a particular end state, and that's the vision. And the values is the core ideas around the how. In going from point A to point B, in serving a mission that I stand for today, what are my core principles? How do I serve these core principles? And how do I create a moral compass for the organization that's at work so that everybody knows that these are the things we stand for and internalize it? This actually is very important to not only leaders, but to employees. So there should be a uniform kind of code of conduct for leaders as well as employees that everybody is able to embody, right? So these are the 3 things. And then let's look at a little more detail in each of them. When you think about a mission, or a mission statement as it's called, certainly it's there to kind of understand what is the organization's purpose, why does it exist? But it also cannot be war and peace, right? It has to be really concise, and it has to really capture the essence of your organizations in a few words. It should inspire. So it's not tactical. It is not saying, I am here to give my shareholders 20% dividends. That's not a mission. It has to be long-term, and it has to be inspirational. Given the times that we're in, flexibility and agility have to be built in. So having a very too specific a mission sometimes can be detrimental to the point that was raised earlier in the talk today, which was around innovation, right? In order to innovate, you want to keep the mission kind of broad enough, but focused so that you actually have some flexibility and agility built into it. A mission is always built based upon employee feedback. And one big pointer is, as times change, it's okay to tweak your mission. And in fact, you will be working on an example, an exercise where you will be tweaking your mission as well. A vision, again, this is the aspirational, the longer term view for why your organization exists. what impact do you want to have, does this organization want to have on the world? So I think it's important to think of vision from a perspective of impact, because you are marching towards something. You want to make some change happen. What is that change? What is that impact? How do I walk towards that? How will I ultimately, and I italicize ultimately because it's not the status quo today. You're not doing this today, but you ultimately want to interact with customers and clients in a certain way. In the example about Netflix, they ultimately at some point wanted to produce their own content when they did have a platform where people were coming, where they could circulate and distribute this content as well. And as you may well know, Netflix is doing that today. The internal aspect of vision, super important. What is the culture of my organization? What are people going to feel when they work for this organization that's helping us get to point B? And how will I get them excited about marching towards this future? You know, somebody mentioned, you know, like strategic kind of leaders such as, say, Chanakya, and I think Mahatma Gandhi also had a very strong, keen sense of strategy. They were always able to get people aligned, but also inspired and excited for what principles they stood for, so that you could actually align a group of people, a team, in order to get to point B. And finally, values. This is all about feelings. You know, what are your employees feeling when they engage? How do you kind of build this? So for this, actually, it's a very internal exercise where you're looking to your company, you're looking at people across all different levels who feel very passionately about the company. You're bringing them together and trying to figure out what is most important for you, brainstorming and collecting these ideas, and you're condensing and making it succinct. I belong to a company by the name Propeller. One of our values, because we're a consulting company, is commit to people. People, you know, we are consultants. Our entire strength is because of our consultants. So commit to people is a #1 value for the company. So the condensing, make it really succinct so that it pops. And then again, like your mission, make it a living artifact. Gather the feedback, socialize it, share it with people, roll it out, but don't be afraid to change it. So that's kind of the mission, vision, values, the 3 big important things that help frame strategy. So use your chat boxes, everybody, if your fingers are on the ready. Let's just, you know, walk through a few mission statements and see where we land. To be the Earth's most customer-centric company where customers can find and discover anything they might want to buy online and endeavors to offer its customers the lowest possible prices. I have Anirudh saying Amazon as well as Pratibha, and they are both correct. Improves lives by mobilizing the caring power of communities around the world to advance the common good. A hint here is when when the holidays come and there's a big giving session that happens across all of your organizations that you belong to. Red Cross is actually a good guess. It is not Red Cross. This is more broader giving. Organizations are contacted for money and funds and things like that. United Way is the answer here. To connect the world's professionals to make them more productive and successful. Succinct, short. LinkedIn, exactly. 3 answers, all correct. And then the 4th, prevents and alleviates human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. All right, somebody already got that, the American Red Cross. Excellent. Some more, to inspire humanity both in the air and on the ground. Very effective use of iconography there, Kshitij. To inspire humanity both in the air and on the ground. Yes, it is an airline company. Sanjana, you're on the right track. Think $99 flights from San Francisco to New York City, or $299. Direct flights, JetBlue, yes, Sundar and Ritesh have it right, exactly. To create a better everyday life for the many people. When you move to a new house, you spend your Saturday afternoons putting together blank for, yes, IKEA, that's right. I feel like I'm playing taboo with you all, but it's all good. Our mission to alleviate suffering, poverty, and oppression by helping people build secure and productive and just communities. This could be tricky. But if somebody gets the general genre, I can, Habitat for Humanity is a close enough guess. Other close enough guesses? And I will, it's the Mercy Corps. So somebody said Peace Corps earlier as well. To give customers the most compelling shopping experience possible. This is eBay is a good answer, but this is an organization that basically has huge stores, multiple levels, has shoe sales 2 or 3 times a year where you get lovely brands at good prices. Nordstrom, Rishma, did the shoe sale get you, I wonder? So Rishma got it right. Perfect. Together, I've been to their shoe sales. They have lovely shoes, formal shoes. So together we create life-changing wishes for children with critical illnesses. St. Jude's is a great example, but this one's more of a foundation. Make a wish, perfect. Awesome. So very good job. So you know how, even if you don't land exactly on the company, how those mission and vision statements kind of inspire the right thought. Like, ooh, this is so powerful. So this page, we're not going to go into. It's the same paragraph about SLI that just, this is in your packet of pre-session. This just kind of breaks it down so you have a bulleted kind of list of everything. What we will do now is to look at mission, vision, and values. But before that, here's the poll. Think of an organization you work at or are closely associated with. How well do you resonate with their mission? And you'll see a number of options. So I'm going to go and activate this in a second. There you go. The options are not sure. I'm unaware of their mission statement. You know the mission statement, not at all. You don't resonate with it at all, but you are here. Somewhat, and then 100% is the last one. And I've seen some answers go to 100%, somewhat. There's a little bit of finding, being unsure of what the mission statement is. Great. Awesome. It's very good to see that B is not, a function right now in your lives, because, you can potentially, we all work for a living, and sometimes we don't have choices and options as to where we work. And so we could be in a place where we don't resonate with the mission of an organization, but for lack of options, we are with the organization. So B is sometimes a possibility. So I am happy to see that none of you are in that situation or scenario. And I'm certainly interested to hear about those that feel somewhat aligned with the organization's mission as well. So that's good. So you all have a little bit of awareness, except 17%. I would encourage you to find out the mission of the organizations you're either involved with or work for. And I would encourage you to think about what does this mean for kind of my own thought process for who I associate with and organizations I associate with, just from an awareness perspective, if not anything else. So with that, great. Now that you've thought a little bit about what mission, vision, values exists out there, you personally have a sense of the North Star of your own, the companies, organizations you're organized with. Here is my suggestion for mission, vision, and values that actually somebody else came up with. I gave somebody the SLI brief, and they came up with this mission, vision, and values. And again, a mission, vision, values process is a 2-week to a month-long process where you're putting a lot of your energy and revisions into this. What we're doing here is we won't get into that much, but what we will do is help you tweak this. So what we want you to do is say, come back with one suggestion for the mission or one suggestion for the vision and such. So you'll be in a breakout room for the next 6 minutes. Please brainstorm and just make 1 or 2 edits and so that you can share. Breakout room 1 and 2, you will be working on the mission. Breakout room 3 and 4, vision. Breakout room 5 and 6, values. So if you're in room 1, you're looking at this mission and saying, this kind of fits the bill. Maybe I'd like to add this. If you're in room 6, you're looking at values and you're saying, you know what, empathy and trust is really great, but I think for SLI to plan for their future, their employees also need to think about this value, or SLI as a whole needs to think about this value. With that, I will let you get into your breakout rooms. Great. No, I hopped in on a number of rooms, so thank you for allowing me to crash your party. This time around, I recommend that we all use the chat to post some ideas, and I will just use the chat as well to track these out of the corner of my eye. But basically, the things that I noticed when I was in the breakout sessions is the vision piece. I think the word resource didn't kind of sit very well with folks. There was conversation about, should we make it training? Should we make it creating opportunities and a path, so on and so forth. I think the mission, the things I heard was that it seemed a little arduous and long, and it just felt clunky. And so there was a lot of kind of, how do we wordsmith it? How do we make it more concise? How do we bring in certain important things in there that it stands for, et cetera, was in the mission. Again, feel free to use the chat to update other ideas. For values, I actually thought there was some notes around empowerment. There were some notes around empathy and customer focus and what that means. There was some notes around optimism and social responsibility. So I think there were all of these interesting ideas around how do we make the values resonate internally to the organization, but also externally, right? So in the interest of time, make sure you keep putting your ideas in the chat, because then we can harvest it from there. But in the interest of time, I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 ideas when you think more about developing a strategic plan. One is to think about why the competitive positioning. So when you build a strategy, it's important to understand, why are people going to come back to SLI? I know in either this conversation or the earlier one, there was a lot of focus on creating safety in the context of the current state of affairs everywhere, and also the fact that SLI uses clothes that are handed from family to family, right? And so if people are coming back, they need to feel a sense of safety. And so so creating a sense of safety will be one of the reasons why customers could potentially come back to you in the future, especially if other stores are doing that at this time. Why do employees join you? I think, that goes back to the values as well. Like when we were talking about values and optimism came up, employees who are looking for a job or struggling, if they come to SLI with the sense of, we really want to feel, not only land in a job, find a livelihood, so on and so forth, we actually want to feel uplifted, right? And that's why they come to you. And so there's a sense of, how do your employees feel and how do you continue to engage with them? What does an employee experience look like? And then what changes the status quo in the environment? That's another thing in competitive positioning to think about. So for example, if everything goes online, that changes the status quo. And so there is now going to be a need of figuring out, okay, how do stores work with each other? That becomes a real opportunity. This came up as well in one of your conversations. How do we work with each other? How do we share inventory? How do we represent this inventory in a web presence or in a catalog so that a lot of different people are able to come and take advantage of your services? So that's the third thing, in like understanding how competition is going to adjust with the status quo. And then what are you inspired by? Why even create an organization or come to work for an organization? What is it that brings you back here? And so these are the various things to think about when you think about competitive positioning and build that into your strategic plan. The second thing is, what are the big rocks to focus on to advance to our vision? And that falls under the area of long-term objectives. Every strategic plan comes with a set of long-term objectives. And what are the big things that need to change? Now, big things can be things like, okay, we, in order to continue to serve the people that are not able to find employment, thrift stores is not the only way to do this. Like thrift stores is probably a way to do it, but there are other big rocks for us to be able to do that. Should we build a website that works, say, in partnership with one of the brands that came up, LinkedIn, that allows our people to gain a web presence and gain access to the opportunities that are available via the web? So those are some of the big rocks to kind of focus on when you want to advance to your future vision. And then what are the expectations for our financial performance or our social outcomes, right? Both of them are important. Having kind of consulted with some large consumer products companies, one of the social outcomes that they're really focused on is sustainability. Are they using sustainable materials in the consumer products that they're building? Are the boxes and packaged goods that they use for shipping their products sustainable? Are they funding and encouraging, the progress of discovering materials that are more sustainable for the creation of this? So there's the R&D aspect of this. So there's lots of different things that are expectations that we need to kind of build into our fabric. And then what are we known for? When you buy something or when you avail of a service, you really revel in something that is provided to you. And that becomes kind of the stamp of excellence. And so when they excel at it, how do we kind of continue to do that so that people can come back to us expecting that? When I first took some family to Prashanti Nilayam, one thing that they thought Prashanti Nilayam excelled at was the quiet way in which things just happened through a whole host of volunteers. Volunteers will quietly guide you from A to B to C, and people were just able to follow suit. And people who came with me felt a great sense of calm. And that is certainly something that the volunteers there excelled at. That's just one example. You can think of tons of these areas, but that should tie into long-term objectives. Third, there was a lot of discussion around, how do employees of today plan? How do we mold employees, and how do we provide employees with the right resources and tools so that they can actually help achieve the future organization and the vision that it's laid out for itself? For an example, even in the SLI case, if there are people that are extremely good at, say, stacking the shelves right now because it's a physical store, can they be given some skills to make sure that they're doing the same thing in a virtual world? Like in a physical store, if they knew exactly where product went, and if they knew exactly where, what sizes were available, and were able to help people while being efficient at stacking shelves, which is what happens in a store, is that transferable to the future vision of the organization where this potentially happens online? How do they continue to be merchandisers in this space? That's one example. This is a really important example because however much automation progresses, there's always a sense of when at the end of the line or a sequence of events, an employee, a human being is involved. There's a natural sense of how does that person feel connected to the work that we're doing, and how is that person empowered? That's another value that came up in a number of your conversations. How is that person empowered to better represent the organization, what it stands for, both internally and to its customers? And then the last of the four is the financial piece. Generally, companies will have a 3-year period where they talk about, this is what we want from a revenue perspective. This is what we're paying from an investment and headcount perspective. Investments can be R&D, investments can be more physical space because the company is growing. Investments can be opening new branches. Investments can be acquiring another company in order to further out the longer term vision. But all of that is going to hit your artifacts, your financial artifacts, in a number of different ways. And then you also have to think about market factors. We've been in a 7-year period of great growth in this country. And that has changed in 2020. So how do we think about market factors when we think about the next 10 years, right? And this is important not just for companies, but also to think about ourselves personally. Like if we are used to a version of planning that tied really well to certain things, such as interest rates in the market or the home market being a certain way, et cetera, are we then going to change our shift our thinking a little as we think about where the environment is heading to, the future is heading to, and how we adjust for that? And with that, building out high-level financial artifacts. Most CFOs, their best friend for life is Excel or an equivalent, because they're always pulling out a model, building something, creating a quick artifact, and building something high level that is really helpful, is helpful for you to kind of gauge your path, is really super important here. All right, so I will just say this is a high-level strategic plan that we helped with the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. By we, I mean the company I work for, where we helped them with a new vision. So this is one of the things where we took a large number of processes. We sat people together. We had visioning workshops. We wanted to see where they wanted to head to. How are you going to change your organization in a direction to head there? And we came up with this. To work in partnership with the chamber and community, acting as a catalyst for economic vitality, education, and the betterment of San Francisco's quality of life. So something concise, something that really stands to what the Chamber of Commerce is seeking to do. And so this was the vision. And then remember we talked about in the last few slides, long-term objectives. That'll look something like this: 5 long-term objectives with some clear ideas on how to get there, both an organizational standpoint and a financial standpoint. So for example, number 4 has a finance strategy here. We had a backing kind of Excel a model or a model that was based upon just, various inputs of finances, spend, headcount, so on and so forth, that we helped them build. And so what this says is when the 4 things that we talked about, right? The competitive positioning, the long-term objectives, organizational impacts, and financial forecasts, when they come together, you want to create something really crystallized that is a strategic plan. This will sit on the desks of people who work for this organization and really guides them in how their day-to-day tactics maps with the overall direction of the company. With that, I will just talk about 2 things. I will touch on 1 thing and talk about 2 things. The first thing is, Winston Churchill, in his inimitable, slightly wry and sarcastic style, had this quote, which is so valid, which is, however beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the results, right? So you want to always create strategies that are that have in them hooks, that have in them mechanisms where you can actually measure. So if empowerment is something you want to achieve, are you actually achieving it, and how? If sustainability is something you want to achieve, are you attaining it, and how? Take your carbon footprint, take your, how many plastics are used in your organization, et cetera, and find ways and strategies to measure where you need to get to. We won't get into this, but this is a precursor to the deployment work that's coming next week. These are some frameworks. OKR, for example, thinks about the measurement. So when they build strategy, they think about the measurement in terms of spelling out the objectives, spelling out key results that reflect the objectives, and then making sure that the key results are measurable. Strategic Horizon says, okay, you have 3 categories. Always focus on one of those 3, either the business you're very famous for, your core business, or you look for the emerging opportunities and really put all of your energy into that, or you think about blue sky, which is opportunities that don't even exist today that you want to start building a path to. But you're very clear, you state it, and then you measure how you build your path to one of those categories. Values disciplines is actually a combination of 3 things. One is how well you're operating, how well are your customers getting to know you and getting to enjoy what you're putting out from a product or service perspective, and then how well does your product or service lead the market. And then again, this is, you measure it against the market, you measure it internally, etc. And this actually is the 4th framework, which has again measurement hooks that are there in the strategy creation, are what you're going to be spending a lot of time with next week with Mr. Jaggu Jagannathan. And he's going to talk about balanced scorecard, which looks around strategy, how you deploy strategy, and how you measure 4 different aspects of it: financial, customer, internal business process, so how well and optimized is your process and how standardized is it, and then learning and growth of your employees. How much is there a learning growth mindset among employees? Are there opportunities for them to grow, etc.? With that, I will leave you with 2 additional thoughts. 1, strategy is not going to convert itself to tactics overnight. Always challenge the notion that I have a strategy, I have an idea, I've laid out a path, I have built it, they will come. Challenge that notion. People will not come since you've just built it. You have to create a notion of WIFM, what's in it for me, and have the strategy translated into what's in it for everybody who encounters it. Especially when you think about even when you're volunteering and you kind of put out a volunteering announcement, think about it from the person receiving it, and why would they be excited to participate in it? How do I position it in a way that they really feel connected to that and then continue to engage with me? This is a huge science. There's lots of frameworks available for change management, but this is an important consideration as you're thinking through any strategy. And the last piece is, we talked about this continuously, but I really want to leave you with this, especially because this particular workshop today is emanating from the SAI organization. We have to pay increasing attention and embed this in our strategy, because again, if we don't embed it in our strategy, we're not going to have the right mindset, the right frameworks, and the right tools in our day-to-day actions. Things to think about: the planet and its sustainability. Things to think about: diversity, equity, and inclusion. The way in which our company works today, does everybody have an equal voice? Are people empowered equally? Are we including everybody in the right frameworks, within the right conversations? And this can mean, this can mean across all different factors like socioeconomic levels, race, gender, all of those different, people are different and they come to the work with their different perspectives. How do we create a place to build that in and in fact embed it in our strategy? And the third is, what are we doing to the communities we live and serve in? So with that, I will just end with Swami's quote on this particular thing, which I think is beautiful and something that we think about when we think about strategy. And that is, no bird casts the seeds on land to grow food for itself, nor do beasts plow and enclose fields claiming, this is mine, this is for my children and my children's children. So we have to think about more than what is just in our immediate futures, and think about how we are impacting all of the environments we are living and the communities we're living and thriving in. So with that, I will say thank you to the group, to Swami for this opportunity, to the group for kind of helping me with the logistics, for Jagu Uncle for his guidance and encouragement. I gave you some examples from my employers, so I have to thank them for access to these these examples. Finally, I want to thank you all. Taking time out of a Saturday afternoon for your personal and professional development is great and laudable. Continue doing what you're doing. Help your minds and your hearts grow. And that's how we all progress and advance. So with that, thank you, and Saira.
I apologize for the technical difficulty. Just kidding. Can you give me a thumbs up once it loads and you can see it on your end? Thank you. So thank you so much, Mr. Sunil Kasturi, for a content-packed and informative session. I know I wish I had the chance to learn this in my university, where usually a lot of students first get a taste of starting organizations. So I particularly loved your take on mission, vision, and values and how to build that. I also love the interactive taboo, and that section definitely got me wondering of what the mission statements of the organizations that I love are. One of my biggest takeaways is that I love how you tie strategic planning to how Swami has emphasized the importance of assessing our present state to map out our goal. And this is applicable not only to our spiritual growth, but professional and academic goals, like you've outlined. So with that, I want to say thank you so much once again for everything you have done and the content you have reviewed for us. We're extremely grateful for your guidance. And we know that this is a great start to the strategy planning from development to deployment. So we're very excited for that. I do want to mention to all the participants that the ELWS team wants your feedback We will shortly share a link with you in the chat box. Please take a few moments to complete this before the end. You will also find in that feedback form a place to request additional material from Mr. Sunil Kasturi. As a follow-up to this session, we highly recommend attending the next session, which is on strategy deployment, which will be led by our own Mr. Jagu Jagannathan. It will serve as the perfect follow-up to today's session, and please keep an eye out for the pre-session material that will come your way as well. The registration link will also be shared in the chat box shortly. So with that, we are very lucky that Mr. Sunil Kasturi has very graciously offered to have a Q&A session for all of us. So the process will be that you raise your hand or you can send a question in the chat box and we'll call upon you to ask your question in that order. Thank you and sayonara. Do we have no questions?
Can I just go in that case? Okay. So thank you so much. I am a fan as always. But so when I think about strategy or just the smaller projects that I've been fortunate to lead, I think there are two aspects. One is in terms of looking at strategy, one is the KPI, the metrics aspect. The other is just your gut instinct or whatever it is that tells you that this is the way forward. I'm sure when the stakes get much, much higher, that kind of sense of balance gets thrown out of the picture, or perhaps it does not. I just don't know yet. How do you go about balancing that when you were talking or thinking through strategy in your discussions?
Yeah, I think having a very honed sense of instinct is really important. And so I will say that, you know, very often you want to structure it as best you can. You want to put in the metrics in place. You really want to make sure that you have a way to say, this is what success means like. But I think that's where building some flexibility into the way in which you even think. So not thinking of strategy, and it's actually, I mean, I used to be an engineer. I trained as an engineer. So it can be very frustrating not to say, you know, this is the plan and let's go do it, right? Which is how we say A leads to B leads to C leads to D. I think with strategy, it's important to say, this is a plan. And these are the reasons why we think this is going to work. This is the direction forward. This is how we're measuring it. But have the openness to kind of be flexible and come back and assess. And be able to say, okay, within the framework, the larger framework of what my company, my organization, my team does, I have the opportunity to tweak, and I'm going to be open to that. I think that's one aspect of that in strategic planning. The second thing, which is also super important, instinct. You know, metrics everyone understands. Instincts, there's a huge change management aspect to it. You can't successfully lead teams through large strategic shifts if you're not able to communicate to them why your instinct is telling you something, right? Or why you're asking them to say, we were going that way, but I want us to go slightly this way now. Because people, again, everyone around you is expecting a sense of stability of direction and so on and so forth. I think people who work in maybe startups have a little bit more of a sense of things are going to be kind of thrown at you. Your organizational structure is different. But if you work for even medium or larger organizations, there's a sense of structure that you come to expect. For that, I think it's important when you're especially using your instinct to tweak strategy or hone strategy, to be able to communicate something, which is not just it's not just, I have built it, they will come. You have to go against that and put a little bit more thought into that. Or it can't just be trust me. I wish I could say trust me and have everybody just follow suit. It doesn't quite work that way. I think there's a little bit more thought there. But if you're able to if you're able to do that, I really think that, you can get your organizations, your teams, and yourself to embody that flexibility, and B, they are going to rely more on your organization is going to rely more on your instinct as well, because you're able to give it a voice. And so I think that becomes important. Yeah, this is art and science. So that's for sure. I should have put that in my slides. It's a nice slide. This is art and science for sure. So.
I can go next if there's no other questions, actually. So, Sunil, thank you so much for your wonderful session. And one thing that really caught my eye in your slides was uh, once you've defined your values, like you just following off Vishitesh's question, right? Like you said, you should be open to change. But values in general are also meant so that they give you stability when the environment around you is changing rapidly. So under what circumstances do you think that like we should reconsider like, reevaluating our value system? I mean, I know it happens perhaps when leadership changes in the company, but if there's the same company and, for example, to give you a very concrete example, say mid Q3 of 2019, so November, somebody sets their goals and, expect COVID at all, and suddenly COVID hit, right? Should they like use this catastrophic event to like reevaluate where they are, etc.? Like, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I actually think that values should be less flexible than strategic plans or missions. I think values are why your employees will continue to come and kind of give their all to the company, to the mission they're working for, to the organization, as well as the clients that you serve or the customers that you serve will come to expect that of you. So that's the part that should maybe change only when there is a meaningful kind of gap that is exposed and not necessarily otherwise. So for example, we started off with Propeller internally started off with 10 values 5-6 years ago, and we would look at these every year, and we just felt that some of them were wordy, were in capturing exactly what we wanted. So it wasn't as much, to your point, as we wanted to change our value system, but we felt that there was a huge opportunity to kind of fill a gap that didn't exist. So one of our values right now, and we expressed it a different way, one of our values right now is embrace our differences. Because we thought it was important. I talked about, the diversity, equity, inclusion piece. We thought it was important to say that we are a group of people that are very different and think differently. And we serve a lot of clients from the public sector to pro bono, nonprofit clients to for-profit, clients across various industries that are extremely diverse. And so when you bring us in, expect that we will maybe be different from you, but a core value of ours is we want to embrace that. We want to make it work so that it's successful for us. And I don't think we expressed that clearly. It was kind of in our value system, but what's not written, what's not measured isn't really tracked. And so people don't have a sense for what it is. So for values, I think it has to be a more thoughtful process. And I'll go back to the way in the slide where I said how we develop values. Once that value is shared with a group of people, you have to be really, really systematic and thoughtful and methodical about making those changes, even if it's a word or a phrase. Which is why I would say you need to bring multiple people into the conversation, kind of put forth the values that you're following today, try to understand why there needs to be a change, if at all, get their feedback. So I think there's a systematic exercise as opposed to yesterday we were X and today we are Y. And I think, again, to go back to it may be an instinct in one or two leaders or one or two people in the company that starts that conversation. But just as I was speaking to Kshitij, as long as you're able to bring a group and get really solid around it, I think then you can kind of chart the path forward for the company. And that's how an example like Embrace Our Differences came together. So. Any other questions? I am curious, how many of you found this, knowing that strategy doesn't get a lot of time, so to speak? Like, Rishma, you mentioned this in your debrief, doesn't get a lot of kind of front and center kind of time in a lot of our education and our work. how many of you found this, you know, a little bit of a challenge to relate to? We do live in, our worlds are very, you know, very methodical, very structured. And so something that's a step behind is a little sometimes different. So I'm curious about that.
I mean, I can go like it's very difficult. I mean, like first thing is like thank you for this, but you know, like we have to plan things and all, but like there should be. I mean, like I don't know as a I mean, like I can think of, but I'll plan, but like no, I have to buy something, I have to plan something, I have to learn something, but like again, focus is not there. But also I feel like some guidance with somebody who are like good at it. I mean, if you can guide us like you know at each step, like strategy is not in like you know now at this point, it's lifelong, right? So for everything, if you personal, professional, educational, it validates for everything, right?
Right.
At every step of life. So I think it's very important to have like you know knowledge, focus, and when to do, how to do, and appropriate time, and then like you know whether the strategy is good or like this whatever it is, like you know uh, like focusing on values, like you know vision. These are all very much important in it. So I mean like it's very important thing for everybody at each steps of life. I mean entire life, but like at least some guidance should be there from our seniors and all. Otherwise it's very difficult to you know plan things like you know. So yeah, example I can think of like see one thing is like see financial planning, right? If you see anything investments and all, I came from like you know from India, like with like less support from relatives or friends, like you know like you know support from there to invest. But other people who are like strategic planning, they'll earn a lot of things, and that is the financial part. About the career part, like you know we are into consulting mode, right? So getting into planning, like you know like moving into jobs, like where it is like your vision and all, and also like you have to sometimes like take risk and go and all, right? Sometimes like it's very much important. If unless you take risk, it's not there. But again, that strength to take a risk is also an important thing. So I can think of these all things, I mean maybe as part of my life. So
This is great. I mean, thank you for sharing that. You're spot on, right? I don't think there's a way to incorporate this and be done. I think it is a process. One thing that you spurred, like even in your personal life, I have a friend who does this pretty consistently. I think every November, December, they actually create a strategic plan for themselves personally. And they have 4 different quadrants: professional, personal, health, and philanthropic, like what charity or what service they're doing. So they have 4 quadrants, and they talk about the 1 to 3 year period. Like, what do I want to achieve in the next year? What do I want to achieve in the 3rd year? So I think, and then they use that, you know, to kind of think about themselves. For me, that's a little too structured. I'm not saying that's the way, but I'm saying there are ways in which you can think about, you know, thinking about the different aspects of our lives and where we want to go, and putting a longer term kind of reach to that, I think is something that this can spur for some people. And I would encourage you to kind of think more about that. And, you know, let me know if you want to have like any follow-up conversations on that either. Happy to do that. Yeah.
Sure, Sunil. Yeah, thank you so much.
Take a stab at your, is there anybody else who wants to go?
Yeah, I will go next.
Yes. Go.
Sayam, Sunil, thank you for this wonderful session. So I am a planner as well. I like the strategy aspect and everything, but where does faith play the role here? Because sometimes, you know, we plan as families, we plan, you know, in the company, yes, that's important, that there's a strategy and all that is there. But when we are doing, you know, as a family, when we are planning and things don't work out,
right,
we strategize and bring in the faith aspect. It's something that I wanted to know and ask.
You know, that's a great question. And the truth of the matter is, I think faith is kind of a challenging subject to bring into organizations, right? To when you're planning. How I do it personally, right? So there are 2 things I think that I'd like to kind of stress here. One is bringing when I am involved in the strategic planning for, say, my company or the company I work at, I think there is a huge sense of surrender in that, and asking for being an effective instrument of Swami is a core part of it. So trying to say that, you know, somebody said looking around corners, we can't look two inches in front of our face what's there. We can't look and understand sometimes. And we are trying to look around corners. But, you know, we can develop skills, and we will develop skills, and we will do that. But I think along with that, like most things that we do, for me, I try to convert my personal faith into, I'm an instrument. I trust in what, you know, whatever Swami has provided in me, in this mind and this body, I trust in that. And I'm going to put that forward for the, you know, for the best of my organization. Whatever my organization can do, how can they do the best that they want? How can they stand up for the values that we have kind of defined for this organization? And I think that's where it becomes important to align yourself to where you have the opportunity. Again, I know it's a privilege, but where you have the opportunity, align yourself to the organizations you want to work with, right? Because that's how you can be confident that I am working with this organization whose values I align with, and I'm going to, you know, do my best and also have a sense of surrender. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is, I think we'll be very careful when we have to balance a sense of confidence with a sense of service. I really, really like that servant leadership is the topic these days. Like, you know, the whole structure of leadership is changing, and everyone is focused about how can leaders serve the companies they work with, the groups that they support, the organizations that they lead. And so I think that becomes the second part, right? Which is, if I think of this not as a way to establish, and this again comes from faith and Swami's principles, this is not a way to intellectually establish my superiority. Oh, Sunil thought of this and guided the strategy of the company. This is in fact a way to say, okay, 120 mortgages depend upon some decisions that are happening in this room. My company has 120 people. Some of the decisions in this room are affecting healthcare, mortgages, future college funds of 120 people whose lives are in our care. How can we build the right values? How can we make the right plans? How can we take the appropriate amount of risk and balance it with innovation and creativity to move this forward? I think that humility is very important in that equation. And that's where my faith kind of comes into play here. And I think each one of us has a way of internalizing what Swami says to each one of us, and kind of make that our own in the way we do our work. And certainly we need that humility, especially when we're trying to predict the future, right? So I would highly recommend that. So one of my company values, which is be humble but smart enough to have an ego, which is not 100% in alignment with what Swami says. But what we're saying is demonstrate high levels of humility, but smart enough to have an ego. What we were trying to communicate is be self-confident. Like when your client brings you in to guide them, kind of be confident with what guidance you're giving them. I think that balance is actually pretty important.
Thank you.
Thank you. I actually love that question. We don't get to talk about Swami as much in our strategic planning circles. So this is really nice.
No, I mean, this is something that always, I try to, no matter what, bring in Swami in everything that I do at work, because everything is offering to him, right? So especially when Niranjan and I plan something, he always makes sure that, Swami is the first point for everything. But sometimes when things don't happen the way we wanted, there's a question of faith. And that's in personal life, but even in the office setting, that's there too. Swami, we're aspiring for this, please, make sure this happens. And then, all of a sudden that's not happening, so that's why.
Yeah. And I want to go back to that second aspect of that is like all the things we're encouraged to do in life is to focus on what we can do, our actions, and not what comes, the results. Having a level of again, we're doing our best with what we think will happen and guiding our path there, putting 100% into it, but also having that sense of, okay, and now it's in your hands, right? So this is great. Thank you.
I think Kshitij, you were going to ask something. Did you want to?
Yes. Are there any other questions before I'll take that to be a no? All right. Sunil, could you elaborate a little more on the opening up your mind aspect to just more possibilities in general? What are some practices that have helped you get there? Because I truly resonated with your perspective on how you were an engineer. And I think I still see myself as somebody who's there. Like the entire talk about strategy, mission, vision, values, etc. They're happening at a very top level, but it's hard to get out of that narrow vision, the tunnel vision, right? Could you talk about what are some things that just helped you get out of that sphere?
Absolutely. I think in a number of the organizations we work with, we find that the backgrounds of people that we interact with, right, are extremely different. And so one big kind of change is not just in consulting, even when I worked full-time at a high-tech company, not everybody came to that via education necessarily. Like it's not like they went and got an undergrad in X and a graduate degree in Y and then started working in this. They came at it because they were building computers in their garage, or they took some assignments teaching English abroad in South Korea and whatnot, and then came back to it. So I think for me, the biggest learning about opening our minds is to understand that my perspective as a combination of my education, kind of my cultural origins and my life journey is something. And then everybody in the room has a different thing that they bring into the problem or bring into the problem space for solutions. I find it extremely valuable. The first thing about openness is actually making sure you are very confident about what everybody thinks about the plans that you put out. So this is another case where if you're very structured in planning, that voice becomes kind of the predominant voice in the room, and it'll kind of hit the right chord with the engineers, with the financial folks, with all of those kinds of people. But taking a moment to take that person with the different paths that arrive there and asking them, what do you think? I haven't heard you speak. Or asking the question, if people in this room had to raise a point of, if you want to be critical about this particular strategy, what would you raise? Right? We spent some time today looking at how would we tweak the mission, vision, and values. We should ask that question. Like, if you wanted to tweak this plan or make this better, what would you change? And asking that with an open mind becomes that first step as we create that openness. And I think, we have to, our mind again will forget the times, will always revel and remember the times when we were right. And will forget the times where we were wrong, and actually taking somebody's advice or viewpoint or, some instinct even that they brought to the table could have helped us. And I think we need to magnify those in our heads. Swami always says, magnify your faults and the good in other people. So we always have to think about, like, oh, this person seemed a little resistant to this idea last time, and that plan didn't go as we thought it would. Maybe we should have amplified their voice, right? And so I think there is this real notion about how do you get, like, when you think about something not going right critically or not, we shouldn't be quick to dismiss things that didn't go quite well, and actually think about, were there people in the room who had the answers, who had kind of a counterpoint of view, who were, because of the way their background, where they came from, maybe they were artists and they were a little bit more creative about how they painted that picture. And so how do we kind of incorporate those voices? I think, one of the things one of the things, and there's a balance, because if we continuously go down the path of just beating ourselves up, then we're not going to show up with confidence either. So there's a huge balance between that confidence aspect and being self-critical. And know that everything that we do helps surrounds us. We are in a very supported environment. We have to walk through life with that confidence. And that may be work, that may be this group of people, that may be, as Pavitra pointed out, that may just be us kind of asking for divine inspiration. But we are in a supported environment. And, you know, are there resources that we can help engage to open our minds? I think is important. Challenging our assumptions is the other thing. Like there's one group, there's one organization, kind of a group I belong to, that would say, don't think everything is assumed truths. You know, that, you know, they're all like, don't challenge some of the assumptions you're making going into these conversations about scenarios, about people, about viewpoints, and that's also helpful. Oh, so-and-so is always going to be like this, as opposed to, ooh, no, this viewpoint's actually helpful because it's bringing me to a different conclusion.
As a follow-on to that, sorry, very short question. So let's say in my current role, I don't really get to think so much about the mission, vision, or the values of the company. Mm-hmm. And let's say it doesn't really affect me as much visibly. And let's say I don't align, I just read up my company's mission, vision, value. Again, this is just an example. Let's say I don't align with it 100%. What would you do? Like, would you still continue with, like, in your role in that company? Because, or yeah, I think you get it.
I do. Be pragmatic. Always be pragmatic. Like, you know, this is my first thing. Like, I am a person that I actually am an emotional human being, which I don't have trouble admitting. But especially if you're an emotional human being, we all are emotional human beings to some extent. We have to kind of let, Swami says, drink that water, have those thoughts, be pragmatic, think through it, and create a strategy for yourself. And that is the advantage of being strategic. That strategy can encompass years, months, or a different point in your lifetime where you want to achieve some of the goals you've set for yourself, right? So I think that's really important. And once you create that strategy, you have to commit to your day-to-day work with the work is worship mantra. You have to do that. Because if you go back and constantly are like, oh, that's my strategy, but I hate doing what I'm doing, that's not going to get you anywhere. So you have to get to a place of, okay, what I want, my kind of life and my path is slightly different from what this company offers. Lots of good people, lots of good opportunities, but it's different. I want something different. Okay, what's my path? And how do I kind of get there? Being pragmatic about that path, seeing that is A, and B, always look at the good things that the current opportunity is giving you. It's never black and white. And again, our mind usually wants to go to a place where when we're feeling the slight amount of misalignment, we go immediately to the place of, oh, this is terrible, it sucks, why am I doing this? And that's not true either. So look at the good things, the good people you're learning from, the good teams you may be supporting, etc. And what does that give you? And how does that benefit you as a professional, as a spiritual human being, etc. So I think it's important to like take holistic views of things. I'll give an example. When I belonged to a company that I wasn't super excited about back in the day, I was an immigrant and I could not change jobs overnight. My visa status was tied to my employment with this company. And so I had to be pragmatic about, okay, this is not where I want to be. I don't even know how I can chart a path, right? Because you're constantly struggling with green cards and naturalization and whatnot. I don't even know how I'm going to chart a path, but I'll put out the energy that I want something different, start planning towards it, pray for guidance, but also do my best and try to understand what is this role providing me? And what am I learning? Who am I interacting with? I think if you take that mindset, you do two things. You are in the present, which Swami wants us to do all the time. He wants us to be in the present, but you're creating a future. You're creating a vision for yourself. And you're kind of putting that out there, that positive energy out there. and you will do the action that gets you there also. So I think it's really important to kind of balance both. So, the other version of this, the 4-quadrant thing is like a something that says personal, professional, 1 year, 3 year. It's just 4 things: personal, professional, 1 and 3. And that just is a good kind of, for me, it forces me to think about, like, in 3 years, is this the status quo? And maybe it is, and that's fine. And maybe it's not. And so what am I doing towards that? I mean, I will be fairly transparent. At some time in my future, I want to teach with local universities and colleges. And I kind of put that energy out there and look at this opportunity. I didn't even know this opportunity was even a thing 6 months or a year ago, but I feel so fortunate that I have this. And now, I will take an introspective look around, how can I be a better teacher? What can I improve? But that's important. That journey is important. And who knows where it will lead, but it's important to be open to that. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking those questions from participants. And I want to also thank the participants who've asked the questions. With that, please be sure to provide your feedback. We really want to hear back from you. And like Mr. Kasturi just said, he also wants to know. He's given us so much of his time. So I'm sure we can spare just a couple of minutes to finish the feedback form. And again, like I said earlier, the feedback form will have a place where you can ask for additional information, resources, and material from Mr. Kasturi if you need. Okay, so with that, we'll just do the closing prayers.
ॐ साईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वप्रचोदयात्। ॐ साईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वप्रचोदयात्। ॐ साईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वप्रचोदयात्।